Let's start with the most recent development, the Constitutional Court refusing the president direct access to review that Palapala parliamentary report. He was told to go through the lower courts instead. It's a procedural ruling and not on the merits of his review application, but nonetheless, the ghost of Palapala still roams.
As it should. Simply because if you and I, as ordinary South Africans, would have received any money from anywhere in our bank, no matter how minuscule, you would get a call from the Reserve Bank inquiring where and how this ended up in your account. In his case, obviously, it is cash. The quantum has been disputed, and all of that's fine. But surely, I can't imagine how a Reserve Bank and the South African Revenue Services have taken this long to be able to have any kind of clear indication after an investigation about what's going on. So for me, just administratively, there's a major problem. Secondly, despite the problems and the flaws with the actual report, and there probably are many, the reality is that this is a process determined and decided by Parliament. Parliament, as per our constitution, is a completely independent arm, and whatever problems there might have been, you are supposed to allow Parliament to conduct its process however it chooses. Once it is concluded, you could take it on review. But here, of course, this was preempted. The parliamentary process was simply not allowed. And I think what has a danger of doing, Mongani, is that it incepts a kind of executive decree over an independent parliament. So I think for those reasons, it was really ill-advised to have done what the president would have done. Sure, you can have problems with the merits, but either then let that be defeated within the parliamentary process, as they eventually did, or at least let the investigation run through Parliament, and then use your majority crudely, of course, as the ANC have done. But then we would have at least known, and it's much more transparent. Here, the entire process has been preempted.
One of the things, of course, you mentioned SARS, the Reserve Bank, but also we know that the acting public protector, we understand, has concluded a preliminary investigation, but we don't quite know what the results of that will be. And part of the difficulty the president now faces, as far as his credibility is concerned, is that whatever decisions he is making, it's difficult to not see the spectre of Palapala behind them.
Well, it's unfortunate, and I think Palapala does overshadow a lot of things, Bongwane, but I mean, it's not Palapala itself which has dented his credibility. I think it's the prevarication, the kind of paralysis which has animated the decision-making processes of the president, firstly. Secondly, the kind of retention in cabinet, despite the fact that you work within a parliament, in a political party context, is the prevarication and the paralysis in making and taking decisions which drive through a political vision.
Yeah.
Of course, that's if you have one, and retaining in your cabinet, in the executive, despite all the power given to you by the Constitution, people who either work against your vision, contradict you, call you weak, tell you administration has done nothing for South Africans. I don't understand how a president retains those people within their cabinet, firstly. Secondly, there are major decisions, particularly about energy, and that's on top of everyone's minds, where policy decisions have already been taken, yet they have been very difficult to implement because your own executive has stood against you, at least some members of your executive stood against you. Thirdly, the continued speaking from both sides of the mouth, and the president enjoyed much higher credibility ratings than the ANC, but has repeatedly displayed himself to be solely, purely, and exclusively a creature of the ANC, in service of the ANC. As a member, as a leader, of course he is supposed to do that. But there is a point at which you are elected in which you start to balance the interests of the society with the interests of your party. But in this instance, the interests of the party has prevailed over every other consideration. And I think that's what's really shot towards his credibility.
He says, of course, it's not dithering, it's caution. He must exercise due caution based on the decisions that he must make. But others are looking at the politics behind the scenes. I played a clip earlier on the show from an interview with the SABC by Prince Mashele, who postulates that one of the things we've got to keep an eye on is the coalition arrangements that are unfolding in Gauteng, and the idea that should the ANC dip below 50% come next year's general election, then the position of deputy president suddenly becomes quite a carrot to dangle.
Absolutely. And I don't think he's completely wrong. I think Prince can sometimes overstate a conclusion definitively. It's healthy to keep a degree of skepticism because we never know how this evolves. But look, the evidence is before us. Firstly, how is it that Mr. Malema maintains the position of being the preeminent and official gossip from the ANC and within the ANC and of the ANC? Because that's really what he often is politically. Often gets it wrong, but that's really the moniker I think of him as. I'm not putting out the gossip. He's the one who does that. But that's firstly, the first evidence mark. The second, I think one has always maintained that the EFF is prepared to be a faction of both the ANC and the DA, depending on what sort of immediate interests are going to be served, particularly for the leadership core of that party. And thirdly, the evidence is around us in the sense that they are prepared to go against what they call their own logic in voting for the ANC, when, of course, they've made very definitive statements that they would never work with the ANC. Well, here we are. They're putting them back in power in places where they did not get the majority to be able to form a government, and are putting them perhaps through the back door, and perhaps not in name, but certainly in the way in which decisions and authority is now being exercised in Johannesburg, in Tshwane, and probably soon to be Ekurhuleni.
All right. So
I think those indications are clear.
So what does the president do now? Paul Mashatile, a shoo-in for deputy president. NDZ, of course, has signed off on the state of disaster for electricity as she did with the pandemic. Is that an indication she's going to stay? And what does he do with someone like Lindiwe Sisulu?
Well, ordinarily, it ought to be a simple decision. But we know that in this case, it is really simple. In the opening, we've said any president who has the prerogative, as they claim he has, despite having to work within a party context, should obviously, justifiably, and credibly even be able to explain to his party why certain people do not belong within his executives. Even if he is forced to keep them, then he must say so, and the country would know where he is putting his interests, whether it is maintaining the semblance of unity, and I use that word semblance advisedly, or whether he's interested in driving through an agenda. Now, we don't know, Bongani, whether Paul Mashatile is in fact a shoe-in for the deputy president, and he might be, but that might be part of the delay or the explanation for why there might be a delay for this long, and it might be something the president might not want. It's no secret, just from the previous point, that there are parts of the ANC which are completely loath to working with the EFF, but in some cases are being forced to. So what you have is a president who's been undermined even by lower structures in his party, for example, the Gauteng province, and going against decisions that he wants. There are obviously, I think, people who he needs to deal with within his executive, but I think he's hamstrung and he's put himself in this invidious position. Had he earlier shown a much more decisive streak and had been less sort of prevaricative, he might have been in a better position, a stronger position now to be able to drive through the kind of policy decisions he needs and to surround himself with an executive who was going to give vent to that vision. Right now, he is caught in this moribund stasis in which he has to consider his interests, the longevity of the party come the 2024 election, but more importantly, his own personal prospects come the 2024 elections and his ability to govern. So far, be it from the fact that people said Mr. Ramaphosa will be much more stronger and he'll be incredibly strong in his second term. Far be it from that. I think the prevarication, the paralysis is going to continue.
Ibrahim Fakir, appreciate your time. Director of Programs at the Owal Socio-Economic Research Institute, ASRI, giving us his analysis of the lay of the land, if you will.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.